Welcome to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I'm KM Weiland, and I am here to take you deep with story theory, writing techniques, and the incredible wisdom of story. I believe story is the greatest power on this earth, and that as writers, we carry the torch of wielding that power with responsibility, passion, and skill. There's no such thing as just a story. Today, it is my honor and my purpose to help you write your best story, astound the world, and maybe change your life. Hello and welcome. You are listening to Season 18, Episode 1, and I welcome you to this brand new year that is before us. So I began last year, 2024, thinking I knew where I was headed, and ended it realizing how my writing career has maybe evolved into something I couldn't have predicted. Almost as if something beneath the surface had been quietly rearranging itself all along. The year, for me, unfolded as a threshold, as it so often does. It was one of those liminal spaces where the old logic stops working and new patterns began to appear. As you may remember, the previous year, 2023, was a glorious and tumultuous year in which I fulfilled a long-held dream of buying a beautiful house, and I entered 2025 with as many questions as answers about what came next. I began the year with deeply held questions about where I wanted to go with my work and my writing. And as the year progressed, I excitedly began to recognize how the foundations of my work were already quietly changing the ground beneath my feet. It felt like the work was asking for a larger container, one built with deeper intention and a much longer horizon. After 18 years of running the website Helping Writers Become Authors, teaching about writing, recording this podcast every week, and publishing so many books, I could sense as the year unfolded that certain things felt complete, but that if some things felt like they were ending, others were about to begin. So welcome to this week's episode, which is my yearly retrospective on the previous year and my look ahead at the year to come. And this one is called How My Writing Career Evolved in 2025 and the Author Business I'm Building for 2026 and beyond. So I look back on 2025, and honestly, it may have been one of the best years of my life. It was a madcap swirl of stress and busyness as I completed my first year as a first-time homeowner. I traveled as much as I could, visiting all three of my siblings at least once. I struggled mightily with recurring anxiety patterns. And I reveled in the glory and the gratitude of the beauty and love that surrounded me. I turned 40 in November, an anniversary that lent a certain gravitas and urgency to the integrations and intentions I was building, something that was accelerated by the fact that only a few weeks before my birthday, I walked away from a very scary highway collision that totaled 3 vehicles, including mine. Particularly this year, I spent time looking back on the 18 years that I've spent building a writing life and a body of work as a writer, first as a novelist, and then perhaps even more potently as a teacher. I have been blessed to walk such an amazing road, one I would never have dreamed of for myself 20 years ago. And it has been the greatest honor of my life so far to create resources and write books that have helped so many writers tell their stories. Truly, I am humbled. And I'm also proud. I realized this year that if I never wrote another book about writing, the body of work I've created these past 2 decades feels complete. If that's my legacy, then I am so happy and satisfied. But in that sense of completion, there were also questions. Story teaches us there is no beginning without an ending and no ending without a beginning. So if I felt in this moment that what I had written was complete, then what next? And so it was a year of realigning, of stepping back, listening deeper, and making space for truth to emerge around what I actually want to build as I continue through middle age with my queen and king arcs on my way to becoming a worthy elder, And if you've read my book, Writing Archetypal Character Arcs, then you know what I'm talking about there. Also, what kind of work gives me life and makes me feel excited and inspired? How do I want to serve the next generation of writers to write stories that are deep and true and life-changing? And how does my creative energy want to grow in my own continuing pursuits of fiction? Now, after all the stress and transformation of 2024, I admittedly entered 2025 feeling more than a little burnt out. Apart from the actual buying a house part, I had pushed myself pretty hard with work in the first part of the previous year in order to free up the space and time for moving later on. And that effort had allowed me to more or less take off the second half of 2024. But as I rounded the corner into 2025 and the return to full-time blogging, podcasting, and all the rest, I had to feel into my resistance and exhaustion. The future felt like a wide open horizon now. As I entered my 40th year, I could acknowledge that I had completed so many of my intentions and dreams for myself, not least with my work and my writing. And going forward, it felt like it was time for something different. It felt, terrifyingly, like it was time to re-examine the infrastructure I had built for my author business 2 decades ago and acknowledge where things needed to be torn down and rebuilt. The writing world, not to mention the world, is not the same place it was when I hopped on my little blogger blog back in 2007 or used CreateSpace to publish first Behold the Dawn, then Outlining Your Novel. So at the beginning of the year, I looked out on the new landscape in front of me with no small amount of fear and overwhelm. Some days, it barely felt like I was keeping up with the old ways of doing things. So how was I going to find time and energy to figure out the new ways? The digital world seemed to be shifting beneath my feet, and the rise of new technological tools, along with the transition from SEO or search engine optimization to this newer, less understood world of GEO or generative engine optimization, felt especially daunting. I knew I needed to adapt in order to keep my content visible, but had no idea how. As a solopreneur, the increasingly crushing administrative load has often relentlessly forced the more creative human parts of my work, including my fiction, to take more and more of a backseat. Like many writers, I sometimes feel a great deal of resistance toward the pace of technological change, and I had the disquieting sense that the ground rules for visibility, discoverability, and creative entrepreneurship were evolving faster than I could integrate. But I knew I wanted to understand these changes for myself and for my own opinions, rather than being swept up in either collective hysteria or blind gung-ho-ness. So I buckled down to do the work of articulating pain points in my business, recognizing the half-formed ideas I'd been carrying for a long time, and imagining pathways into the kind of future that could feel not just manageable, but genuinely exciting. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the spark of possibility about how I might integrate everything I had learned from all the trial and error of my authorpreneurship in the last 2 decades to build an even better 2.0 foundation going forward. Where might I go next? And how might the next decades of my work with writers evolve into even greater harmony with my deepest intentions? And then midsummer, I received an invitation from writing coach Heather Davis to speak at her World Shift online summit for speculative writers. Now, to be honest, this is the kind of request I almost always turn down. Speaking gigs, interviews, anything that requires showing up live is always a tough fit for my energy. But the way Heather framed the opportunity felt different, and the topic aligned uncannily with ideas I'd already been considering for future projects. And because the structure allowed me to pre-record my presentation and participate live only through chat, it felt like a rare chance to say yes without committing to something stressful. And at the very least, I knew the class I created could be repurposed down the road. So I agreed. Now, I expected little more than a solid professional experience. Instead, the entire summit stunned me. Heather orchestrated one of the most seamless, thoughtful, and high caliber events I've participated in my entire career. She made the process effortless for the speakers, and the high quality made it a joy to promote to my audience. Recording the presentation before the summit reminded me how much I enjoy connecting like this when I'm able to do it in a way that supports my natural rhythms. And when the presentation was published, the live chat opened up an inspiring channel of connection. It was a blast to plug in to that live energy and to connect with so many thoughtful, curious, receptive writers. That response lit something up inside me. And the experience ended up being pivotal. It felt like a confirmation of this shift that had been quietly building throughout the year. As I stepped into my 40th year, World Shift arrived like a signpost. It pointed straight toward the kind of work I want to lean into next. Deeper teaching, more intentional live experiences, and offerings that let me share the well I've been cultivating for the last 2 decades. It was, in every sense, an affirmation that the next era of my career wants to unfold in a more expansive, communal, and soul-aligned way. And I'll just say that if you missed World Shift last year, I will be participating again this August. So if you're on my mailing list, you'll get the details. So once again, turning 40 carried a magnitude I couldn't ignore. More than anything, this year taught me that the deeper dimensions of story are inseparable from the deeper dimensions of life. Now, I already shared an entire birthday episode about my personal experience of my 40 years on this planet, but nearly 20 of those years have been spent as a writer, as the steward of helping writers become authors, and as someone who is continually exploring the intersection of story, creativity, and the inner life. So looking back, I can see my 4 decades falling almost perfectly into symbolic arcs. And what strikes me most is the deep sense that my most important work is still ahead of me. Everything I've done so far and everything I'm building now feels like the foundation for what I truly want to teach, and which I am still discovering in the decades to come. So my early years, 0 to 20, they were all about play, pure immersion in story. I had no thought of becoming a novelist, much less someone who would one day teach others about story. It was just that story has always been my language. I spent those years dream zoning, imagining, reading, and living inside that right-brained field of wonder that is still the heart of everything I do. And then came years 20 to 40, and they were years of building, learning how to write stories, mastering the technicalities of plot, structure, and character arcs, creating and growing a business, sharing what I learned with the writing community. My 20s particularly were about learning craft and construction. But if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know my 30s were something entirely different. That decade took me on a profound spiritual quest, of which story was an integral, ineffable part. On the one hand, story became the structure for my inner journey. And on the other, the journey reshaped the way I saw story theory and story structure. The two became mirrors for one another. And now, looking ahead to the next 20 years, I want to continue consolidating everything I've learned, not just about story as entertainment or craft, but story as a powerful initiatory force and a map to our deeper selves and to the mysteries of the universe. This is the work I feel myself preparing for. This is the work that feels like the true calling of my life. These past 20 years were the apprenticeship. The next 20 feel like the point where the inner and outer arcs will finally converge, and I get to step into the deeper teaching that maybe I've been circling all along. This year felt, in many ways, like a sort of re-enchantment. It has been a return to the wonder at the heart of why I fell in love with stories in the first place. As I continue teaching the technical foundations of story, plot structure, character arcs, theme, I also feel called to go deeper into what I've come to think of as the cosmology of story, the idea that story isn't just a craft, but a map. plot, as I understand it now, isn't merely a sequence of beats. It's a metaphysical principle, a pattern that echoes throughout myth, history, psychology, spirituality, consciousness studies, and the hidden architecture of the universe, even, I began to suspect, mathematics. These patterns teach us meaning. They give us context for where we've been and the direction for where we're going. They help us understand ourselves. And because of that, I'm increasingly drawn to exploring story not just as something we create, but as something that creates us. I want to teach in deeper ways, not just how to write a story, but how story itself can be a transformative initiatory force in a person's life. This is the discipline of exploring narrative patterns as spiritual principles and engaging with story as a powerful force deserving of both reverence and responsibility. Now, at the same time, I'm equally committed to continuing the legacy of helping writers become authors by grounding this deeper exploration in the practical foundational material I've spent nearly 2 decades refining. So, over the next years, I plan to build out 2 major libraries of content, probably mostly video-based. The first will be what I'm thinking of as the Legacy Vault, a master archive containing everything I've ever taught about story. My long-term vision is to develop a certification program for editors, since this is something many writers have been asking me about for years. The second will be a sort of story mystery school, where we can explore the deeper frameworks, the cosmological patterns, and the spiritual dimensions of the narratives that so profoundly shape our lives. Together, these 2 bodies of work feel like the convergence of everything I've learned so far and everything I'm being called to teach next. So, what comes next? In the year ahead, you can look forward to seeing some changes in how I show up and what I offer. I'm still working through much of it myself as I feel into what these next years want to become. One shift will be a complete redesign of my website. I'm currently on the hunt for the right designer and developer to work on this massive project. So if anyone has any great suggestions, please email me. With any luck, before the end of the year, you will see a beautiful new home for everything I've created over the last 2 decades, along with the beginnings of the deeper work I've hinted at in this episode. You can also expect new ways to learn from me, connect with me, and work with me in formats I've never offered before, but that feel aligned with the long horizon vision that's emerging. If you're on my mailing list, you'll be the first to hear about all of it. I'm also continuing to study the deeper question of why story matters to the writing life and our inner lives, not just as writers, but as readers and viewers in every corner of our lives. A couple weeks ago, I posted on my website a survey for readers and writers exploring how people interact with stories, why certain narratives resonate, and how storytelling shapes our inner worlds. So if you haven't already, if you'd be willing to spend about 15 minutes participating, it would be immensely helpful to me as I develop the next phase of my teaching. You can find the survey on the homepage of my website, Helping Writers Become Authors. You'll need to scroll down a little bit to find the post that talks about the survey. So, for me, this past year has been a rich blend of growth and integration. It feels unmistakably like the end of a chapter. It feels like that one last deep breath before the page turns into a thick, unwritten new volume. I'm stepping into this next decade with profound excitement, and I'm so grateful to be walking it with you. May your own new year bring stories that challenge you, arcs that stretch you, and creative work that feels deeply true. I hope you'll join me for everything that's coming, and I wish you a luminous start to 2026 and clarity for your own creative paths. And if you'd like to stop by the website and talk to me about all of this, I'd love to hear your opinion. As you look back on how your own writing career has evolved this year, what shifted for you? And what are you hoping to grow or deepen in the year ahead? And if you're already feeling called to start going deeper with me, you can check out my archetypal character guided meditations. I designed these immersive sessions to help you sink beneath the surface of your story, tap the subconscious layers of your characters, and reconnect with the intuitive, dreamlike origins of your creativity. They're a powerful tool for dream zoning, thematic exploration, and accessing the deeper symbolic currents that shape your stories from the inside out. You can explore the full collection in my shop at kmwylandstore.com, and you get one free if you buy all 6. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Helping Writers Become Authors. I hope you'll stop by the site for a full transcript of this episode and to join in the conversation in the comments. Tune in for next week's episode, where we'll continue to explore all things writing and storytelling. If you'd like to support the podcast, it always means a ton when you take a moment to leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. To stay updated on all the latest content I create for you, the best way is to join my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/mailing list. You'll also immediately gain access to lots of free resources, including my books, Crafting Unforgettable Characters and 5 Secrets of Story Structure. For real-time connection with me, more writing advice, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, follow me on Instagram at authorkmwyland. A heartfelt thank you to each one of you for your support and enthusiasm, and especially those of you who support my work on patreon.com/kmwyland. You help make my site, this podcast, and so many other resources available to writers everywhere. So until next week, keep writing, keep dreaming, and most importantly, keep being true to your stories. Thank you for being part of Helping Writers Become Authors.